Hi everyone. Today I'm going to show you a few techniques on how to draw flowers. This will be on snowdrops. We're just starting to see the first blooms come up from the ground here in New York City. And it's always the snowdrops that come first. So let's jump right in. I drew this on February 17th after seeing some snowdrops in the ground. And today I'm going to show you a few strategies. This is primarily from when you're sketching from photos, not from life. But if you're just learning to sketch and you want some ideas on how to approach flowers or botanicals, this might be able to help you. So I'm going to work from this reference photo that I just found online and printed out. We're going to start with my first strategy. My first strategy is to box it up. So this makes it really easy and simple if you're a beginner to find where find your proportions for the flowers. So let's zoom in here just a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw this flower right here. And what I want to do is get an idea of the proportions first. So I'm going to draw a square around it. And this will help me to see where the lines fall on the flower. So we want both sides equal. It needs to be a square because that's what's going to help us see exactly like the proportions. So I'm going to start by going across the bottom and line up just along the bottom. Our bottom petals are going to touch the bottom line of our box. So I'm just going to draw a line across there. You don't have to measure it. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We just want to see where our petal touches. So you can actually see it's just barely touching this petal, but it's not touching that petal. So now I want to find the widest point on each side. So on this side, we're going to be about right here. On this side, we're going to be about right here. Now I'm just going to hold my pencil down, and you can use any pencil for this, and measure. And I think what I'm going to find is that my height is going to be larger than, well, just about. So after I measure approximately the length from my mark to mark, let me make this a little darker so you can see this mark. And actually really comes to like right here. So I'm not going to measure with a ruler. I'm just going to use my finger and see how long that is from the bottom of my pencil. And put my finger right there and right there. And that is my point. And right here. And right here. And that is my point for my box. Okay. So next we want to make some right angles. So I'm going from that widest point again. I'm going to line up the bottom so I have a square. And I'm just going to go straight up. Now my first line was a little bit angled, but that's okay. And then over here. I'm going to come right against that. Go straight up. We're going to box off at the top. And that's about where we are. Your square is not perfect, it's okay. You're gonna see how we're gonna use this. So essentially, this printout is smaller than my final drawing will be. But if you look at this, now we kind of have like a guideline. So instead of looking at, oh, what is the shape of this petal, which might be a little bit difficult for our eyes to see, we can say, oh, the petal hits the bottom edge of our square. We have a little tiny bit of square right there. And we're gonna look at things like this negative space right here. So this area that I'm shading in, around the petal, around the flower, this is our negative space. And what this does is it gives us a better guideline to visualize what we're drawing. So not only are we drawing the object, we're drawing the negative space around it, which really helps when we go to draw. So let me put my sketchbook down here. We'll start off with a square. Now if we want to do all three, then we're going to put our first square off to the right and a little bit high. So here's my sketchbook. And I'm just going to draw a random square here. Again, we don't have to measure. So if I want my snowdrop to be within this proportion, then I can just measure it again with my pencil. I'm going to hold my thumb right here, okay? And what I'm going to do is then I'm going to measure each line according to that. So I'm going to hold my pencil at the corner, okay? And that is where my next line goes. And right here, this gives me my bottom edge. Also, if you just want to go in without a straight edge, have at it. Just go straight in there. And honestly, when I first started doing art, I used to be so meticulous and detailed about, everything being perfect, until I realized it's so boring when everything's perfect. So get in there and make your square wonky, make your lines wonky. It kind of makes it a little bit more fun. Okay, so let's start with the shape of our teardrop. Try to bring this down here so you can see a little better. Actually, what I'll do is put it to the side. Put that right here. Okay. So if we look closely here, we're going to see that the corner edge of our snowdrop is right here. And this one is just barely touching, just so we can get in those basic proportions. Now right here, top of my snowdrop, it's very close to being right in the center of my square. So we can gently sketch in the top, and from here we can start looking at, well, what does this curve look like? And we can see that this line coming out is almost very straight coming out from the snowdrop. And this area where it curves down is about 1/3 from the top. So 1, 2, right in there. So we're going to have, that's the top part. This is going to come down a little straighter, and then we're going to have this nice curve. And we can watch as we draw this, the shape between here, between the petal and our box. This is my 1/3 line. And it's okay if you don't get it perfect. That's what the eraser's for. And this is just practice, just a little sketch. So have an extra line, no big deal. You can look here to see how that line is curving. And maybe that one line was a little too close to the edge, but this line's a little better. Okay, so let's do the same thing on this side. And I'm already gonna say that the top of this is feeling a little narrow. So on this one, I'm noticing that my angle comes down a little bit more angled. And if you look at where the curve is starting, it's almost the same. This curve comes out a little more. It's gonna come out. I'm gonna note that this stays pretty narrow here. And then we'll just connect those two. Okay, so that's the main part of our snowdrop. So back here what we have, this petal comes up. I'm going to darken these lines so you can see them a little bit better. This is the center of our snowdrop, and there's one more petal behind. So you can kind of see the definition there. So coming from here, I'm going to note how wide the tip of our snowdrop petal is. It kind of has this shape to it, narrow at the top, and then kind of has this nice curve that comes out. This part is almost a little curved. Let's see, we're 1/3. I would say that's just below our 1/3 line is where that middle portion is. So we'll let that kind of guide us here. So it's going to come out. And over. Let's work on this petal over here because this is the front portion. Essentially, we want to draw from the front to the back. So we're going to note this curve right here. It's kind of like a shallow S. And I'm going to come down here and note this angle. Another strategy you can use when you're doing this is to think of the angle of a clock. So if our clock is here, the center of our clock is here, and we want this angle going this way, well, this is 6 o'clock. What time? And this is 3 o'clock. What time is this hitting? Right, like 4:30-ish. Sometimes that helps. I find that that helps me more when I'm drawing angles on a building because they tend to be very straight lines. Okay, so let's take a look at that so far. I almost feel like I can widen the petal here, and I'm paying a lot of attention to this area right here. So this kind of shape, I'm going to color it in so you can see here. I want to see that this shape matches this shape. take this and just lift up any lines that I don't necessarily need. Okay, now I'm going to note the curvature of the center petal. I want to get a little more of that. And on this side, really blends together a little more. So I want to bring these lines closer. Just refine as I go. All right, so now we just have our little petal that's hiding behind. That's going to come right from the corner here. Basically lines up with our center line, and it doesn't touch the bottom of our box. So again, I'm going to note the shape right here, how that lines up with this. Does it make the same shape? And this is called negative space. So that's the negative space around our object, but we're able to see that because we put the box around it. If I didn't have a box around the flower, it would be much more difficult to see. So this is just a strategy when you're learning to be able to identify those spaces. Come right here and add this little bit of detail, and we'll add our classic upside down heart. That little delicate bit of beauty there, I feel, is just what makes snowdrops so special. For me personally, they signal that spring is finally coming. Okay. So now we're going to look at this little tiny stem here, and we're going to be able to see that it comes from the center. It's going to go just up over our box a bit, and our stem itself is coming from about right here on our flower. So we can go ahead and put that in. It comes right up past our box. And right back down. That main part of the stem is much thicker. And the drop from the snowdrop is leaning right about from the center of this, right here. Up and over. Add in the thickness of that. Okay. And then we're going to bring these lines straight down here. Right off the page. Okay, so that gives us our main part of our flower and petals. So we can just erase those lines that we don't need. Today I'm drawing on toned paper, which is wonderful because essentially your work is half done. I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm actually going to lift up quite a bit of what I drew in, just leave them as guidelines. So when I draw on tone paper, I often use pen. Today I'm just going to use pencil because that's what I used for the sketch that I showed you at the beginning. And I always use white charcoal. This is General's white charcoal. And this is what I use for the highlights. So when we look at our snowdrop here, we're going to see that this part has a really strong highlight. So we're going to go right in with our whitest whites and put that in. And we want to pay attention to the shape. It comes down right about here. Like that. It's also along the outside of this petal. Sketch that right in. And there's a little bit of white coming up from there too. So those are our whitest parts. There's also a highlight back here. So just to recap, we boxed up our flower. We drew in our contour lines, paying attention to the negative space around our box. And now for the final step, we are adding value. So because we're sketching on tone paper, our mid-tone is already there. We're just going to start by sketching in our highlights. There's another highlight right here. I'll even drag that out just slightly. And then we've got some highlights at the top of our stem here. And these are not as bright. I'm just going to draw slightly lighter, less pressure. The light is coming from the left. It's coming from this direction, if that helps you. So this side of our stem has the highlight. Okay. So now overall tone, our petals on the outside are lighter than the one on the inside. So we're gonna just lightly start sketching in with our white charcoal. Again, on this side's a little darker, but it's still that light value. Using really light pressure. Okay. Then a petal in the back. As I get closer to here, the value gets darker, even though it's still light. And then I'm going to come in and just add some more light tones to our brightest areas. And what you can start doing to give a little texture to your flower is to draw a few contour lines. Contour lines are lines that follow the shape of the flower or the shape of the petal. Okay. I'm going to do a super light bit here. Just slightly lighter than our mid-tone. Just a tiny bit down here. Okay, now we're going to come back and do our darkest areas. I'm going to erase that from there so we can see a little better. Otherwise it makes it look darker. So some of the darkest areas on this are going to be right up here And there's a dark line right along the side of the highlight at the top of the flower. And I often find that some of our darkest darks are always right against the highlight. I'm going to put that in. And I'm working with a 6B pencil, so it doesn't require much pressure at all. I kind of like working a little bit on the darker side because as long as you aren't putting pressure, it makes it very easy to erase it if you go too far, because it's just sitting on the surface of the paper, it's not pushed into it. So when I put in the shadows, I'm going to start putting them in with little lines that follow the contour. So I'm not just going straight up and down. I'm putting my marks in as though they're curving with the shape. I'm going to come to the top of the stem right here. I'm going to come down and right into the stem. The other great thing about drawing flowers and botanicals is that they're very forgiving. So if you don't get it right, don't stress. It's still going to look like a flower. I'm going to draw in some of these contour lines here. I'm going to darken up the top of the stem a bit. Now, just to give this some definition, I'm going to come in here and give a little bit of a line to the edge of our petal. So a little tinge of green right there. This line right here is actually quite dark. Go a little heavier on that. And come along the bottom. Now right here along this flower petal, what I like to sometimes do is just to let there be a little bit of a break in my line, so that it's not necessarily, a hard outline around the whole thing. Actually, I'm going to pick up a little bit of my pencil line from here. Sometimes it's nice to have what they call our lost edges. And I'm going to start coming in here to these little classic shapes. And when I make these, I'm going to make this heart shape with directional lines. So all of my pencil lines are stroking upward. And the bottom edge of my pencil lines are going to be heavier, darker, and the top should be lighter. Because when you look at snowdrops, it's almost as if that green color just fades into the white area of the snowdrop. You can't really see it on the photo, but that's what you can see in real life. I'm going to go to a slightly lighter pencil here and just start putting in some contour lines. Very lightly. And darken up this area here. Snowdrops are just such a delicate flower. They don't take much to draw. Probably less is more. I'm going to do some more contour lines along the edge because the petal is folding backwards. Go back to my 6B just to get a nice contrast here. And I'm going to do a few more contour lines over here. As you can see, this part of the petal is much brighter than this area. And even though I did a lighter coat of white, I'll just add a few lines in for texture. And adding at the edge will help add to the illusion that it's folding under. Because the snowdrop petals are very curved, they kind of like wrap a little bit at the bottom. Add just a little bit more light over here. And right here. Darken this side up a little. All right, and there you have a quick sketch of a snowdrop and a good strategy for any kind of flower that you'd like to use, any kind of flower that you'd like to sketch, especially if it's from a photo, to print it out and be able to see that negative space. So I hope that helps you, and if you like this tutorial, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And I'll try to make more like this. Thanks, guys. Have a happy Sunday.